Have you ever been in the middle of speaking, making your point, finding your voice, and someone cuts you off, talks right over you like your words don't matter? In that moment, you have two choices: react or rise. This isn't about shouting louder, it's about showing strength without raising your voice. Because how you respond when you're interrupted doesn't just reveal your confidence, it teaches people how to treat you. Let me show you how to own the room without ever losing your cool. When someone talks over you, there's an immediate emotional reaction that often takes place beneath the surface. It's subtle but powerful: a flash of irritation, a surge of self-doubt, or even a jolt of embarrassment. In that moment, your mind starts racing. Do I push back? Do I stay silent? Do I just let it slide? But here's the truth most people overlook. Your response in that moment isn't just about defending yourself. It's about defining yourself. You don't need to match their energy to get your message across. You don't have to out-talk them to regain the floor. The power lies not in raising your voice, but in raising your awareness. Because when you're calm under pressure, you're in control, not just of the situation, but of yourself. That's where real authority begins, not in domination, but in emotional regulation. When you allow someone else's rudeness or lack of social awareness to determine your behavior, you've handed them control, and they didn't even have to ask for it. You can feel it in your body: the clenching jaw, the shallow breath, the sudden urge to interrupt back. But if you pause, breathe, and choose presence over reaction, something shifts. You stop being at the mercy of the moment. You start owning it. The greatest communicators aren't the loudest. They're the ones who know how to manage their emotions when things get uncomfortable. When someone cuts you off, they may be trying to take the spotlight, but it's your presence that will hold the room. Staying grounded says, I'm not shaken by this. You're not there to win a battle of volume. You're there to deliver your truth with clarity, purpose, and confidence. Think of it like this. If you walk into a room full of noise, the person who stands still and speaks slowly is the one who draws the most attention. There's power in intentionality. There's strength in stillness. While the other person is throwing their words around like darts, you are anchoring the space with poise. People notice that. Even if they don't say anything, they feel the difference. Being talked over can feel like a personal attack, especially if it happens often or in high-stakes situations. A meeting, a negotiation, a conversation where you were just starting to make a point, and your instinct may be to prove you belong, to push back, to show you're not someone to be dismissed. But that reaction, that quick jolt of ego, is often what causes people to lose control of the conversation, not because they're wrong, but because they reacted from the same space as the person who interrupted them. Now, it's not about communication anymore, it's about competition. You don't need to compete, you need to command. Command doesn't come from volume, it comes from clarity. Clarity in your thoughts, in your voice, and in your values. When you stay composed, you show that your presence is not easily disturbed. And that kind of calm can be unsettling to someone who relies on chaos to dominate. There's also a shift in self-perception that must happen. When someone talks over you, don't internalize the message that your words don't matter. That's their behavior, not your value. Your self-worth is not up for negotiation in that moment, it's already decided. So instead of shrinking, hold your ground. That doesn't mean talking louder. It means being more deliberate, more intentional, more secure in the space you're creating. Start by grounding yourself physically. When you feel interrupted, your body might tense up. Take a breath, feel your feet on the floor. Remind yourself that you're safe, that your thoughts are valid, and that you don't need to scramble to prove anything. Then mentally reset. Choose how you want to show up, not reactively, but intentionally. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, for a moment. Let them finish their interruption. Then pause. That pause does more than give you time to collect your thoughts. It sends a message. You will not be rushed. You will not be pushed. You are here to speak, not to fight for airtime. And when you do continue, let your voice be steady, not louder, just more anchored. That difference is everything. This level of composure takes practice. It takes rewiring your response from defense to leadership. Because in reality, being talked over isn't just about a social inconvenience, it's a test of your presence. Every time it happens, you're being asked silently, will you lead this moment or will you be led by it? The beauty of taking control in this way is that it leaves no room for escalation. You don't feed the fire, you don't stoop to the level of the interruption. Instead, you rise above it, not with arrogance, but with quiet strength. And others will see that. They may not say it, but they'll feel it. You become the person in the room who can be trusted to stay composed when things get uncomfortable. That's not just a social skill, that's a leadership quality. Over time, this becomes a muscle. You stop fearing interruptions because you know how to handle them. You stop dreading confrontation because you're grounded in your approach. And you start becoming a person who isn't easily shaken, not because others never challenge you, but because you've trained yourself to meet challenge with clarity. So when someone talks over you, remember this. They're showing you their habits. You get to choose your response. And when that response is rooted in self-control, presence, and inner confidence, you don't just take the power back. You never lost it in the first place. When someone talks over you, it's easy to feel cornered between two extremes. Stay silent and feel dismissed, or speak up and risk coming across as rude. That mental tug-of-war can be exhausting, and for many people it creates a pattern of shrinking back, allowing others to dominate conversations, and internalizing the idea that their voice doesn't carry enough weight. But setting boundaries in communication isn't about being aggressive, it's about being responsible. It's about owning your space with calm clarity and teaching others how to engage with you respectfully. Too often, boundaries are misunderstood as walls built out of anger or defiance. In reality, a boundary is just a clear understanding of what is and isn't okay with you. It's not an attack on someone else, it's a defense of your own value. When someone talks over you, they've stepped past a line. Whether intentionally or out of habit, they've made a choice that affects your ability to be heard. And while you can't control their behavior, you can absolutely control your response. Setting boundaries in that moment doesn't require raised voices or public shaming. It can be as simple and direct as saying, "Hold on, I'd like to finish my thought," or "Let me wrap this up and then I'd love to hear your point." These statements are not emotionally charged. They're grounded, they're respectful, and most importantly, they redirect the conversation back to balance without creating conflict. The truth is, many people don't realize they're interrupting. They've been conditioned by fast-paced environments, power dynamics, or a need to be heard themselves. But when you calmly speak up and reclaim your place in the dialogue, you're not just protecting your voice, you're educating the room. You're showing what assertive, clear communication looks like. That influence goes beyond the moment. It's also important to understand the energy behind your boundary. If you set it with frustration or sarcasm, it's likely to be met with resistance. But if you set it with confidence and a steady tone, it lands differently. You're not escalating, you're asserting, you're not demanding, you're declaring. That emotional distinction is what makes your message carry weight. What often stops people from setting boundaries when they're interrupted is the fear of being labeled difficult or overly sensitive. But there's nothing difficult about asking to be treated with basic respect. And sensitivity, when guided by self-awareness, is not a weakness, it's a strength. It means you're tuned into the dynamic of the conversation and you're choosing to create space for fairness and clarity. Think of communication like a shared space. A room both people are standing in. When someone talks over you, they're crowding that room. They're stepping into your zone and leaving no room for your thoughts. Setting a boundary is like gently but firmly asking them to step back, so both voices can be heard. It's not about dominance, it's about balance. And balance requires courage. Not the kind that yells to be heard, but the kind that calmly insists on equality in the interaction. The moment you say, "I'd like to finish," or "Please let me complete my sentence," you're shifting the tone of the conversation. You're resetting the rules. And every time you do that, you strengthen your internal compass, the one that says, I don't need to be loud to be clear. I don't need to be harsh to be firm. This approach becomes even more powerful in environments where interruption is normalized, boardrooms, family gatherings, group discussions. In those spaces, silence is often misread as agreement or passivity, but a well-placed boundary is a recalibration. It signals that you're paying attention, you value the conversation, and you expect mutual respect in the exchange. Boundaries also protect your energy. When you let people constantly talk over you without addressing it, you start carrying the emotional residue of those moments. You leave feeling unheard, frustrated, and sometimes even invisible. Over time, that can chip away at your confidence. But the simple act of speaking up, even once, starts to reverse that damage. It tells your brain, my voice matters. I am allowed to take up space. There may be times when setting a boundary feels uncomfortable, especially if the person interrupting holds authority or if the relationship is delicate. In those cases, tone becomes your most valuable tool. Use neutral, steady language. Say what needs to be said without attaching extra emotion. And remember, you're not being rude by asking to be heard, you're being responsible for your voice, your role in the conversation, and the mutual respect the interaction requires. And if someone pushes back when you assert that boundary, if they try to laugh it off, minimize it, or make you feel dramatic, stay steady. Their discomfort with your assertiveness is not your burden to carry. You don't need to over-explain. You don't need to apologize. You simply restate your intent. I'd like to finish what I was saying. That's enough. That's more than enough. There's also value in setting boundaries in advance, especially in recurring relationships where this behavior is a pattern. You might say, in our conversations, I really appreciate having space to finish my thoughts. Can we be more mindful of interruptions? It's direct, it's kind, and it invites accountability without creating shame. You're not accusing, you're inviting mutual respect. Over time, people begin to adjust to those boundaries, not because they were forced, but because they were guided. And you'll notice that the more consistently you set and maintain these lines, the fewer times you have to defend them. People will begin to meet you at the level you've modeled. Ultimately, your ability to set boundaries in the face of interruption reflects your relationship with yourself. It shows how much you value your own voice, how committed you are to healthy communication, and how willing you are to show up with clarity even when it's uncomfortable, because the goal isn't just to be heard, it's to be heard with dignity. You're not demanding respect from others, you're demonstrating what it looks like, and in doing so, you empower not only yourself, but the entire conversation to rise to a higher level. In conversations where someone talks over you, the immediate impulse is often to jump back in, to raise your voice, to prove that your words deserve space. It feels like a challenge, a test of dominance, and your instinct is to win that moment by speaking louder or faster. But there's a different approach, one that's quieter, more deliberate, and often far more powerful: silence. Silence used strategically isn't weakness, it's not surrender, it's control. When someone interrupts you, talking louder may only escalate the moment. But silence, intentional, confident silence, creates a pause that forces attention. It disrupts the dynamic in a way that makes people stop and realize something has shifted. Instead of feeding the noise, you create a contrast. And in that contrast, your presence becomes unmistakable. Most people think of silence as absence. Absence of sound, absence of power, absence of response. But silence, when rooted in composure, is an assertion. It says, I'm not going to fight for space. I already own it. It's a refusal to be drawn into a battle for control. And because so few people know how to use silence wisely, it often leaves a stronger impact than any spoken word. When someone talks over you and you pause instead of reacting, the energy of the room subtly shifts. They may realize they've interrupted. They may feel the awkwardness of filling space that wasn't offered to them. That moment of silence isn't passive, it's charged. It speaks volumes without saying a word. And when you finally choose to speak again, your words carry more weight because they follow intentional stillness. There's also something deeply unsettling for the interrupter about a person who doesn't flinch. When someone talks over you, especially in a heated or competitive setting, they often expect a reaction. They're prepared for pushback, interruption, or defensiveness, but they're rarely prepared for stillness. A pause, a glance, a calm breath, these responses signal confidence. They suggest that you're not competing, you're simply waiting. And waiting, in the right context, is powerful. Using silence doesn't mean you're giving up your place in the conversation. It means you're choosing the timing of your response carefully. Instead of reacting emotionally, you're choosing to reset the tone. And when you do resume speaking, you don't need to announce it or justify it. You simply return to your sentence, your point, your presence, without apology. That kind of composure is something people notice, even if they don't acknowledge it out loud. They feel it. They sense that you are not easily rattled, that you don't operate on the same emotional frequency as someone who relies on interruption to feel powerful. And in that contrast, you stand out, not by fighting for control, but by showing you don't need to. This doesn't mean silence should be used as avoidance. It's not about shutting down or retreating. Strategic silence is purposeful. It's the space you create when the moment becomes noisy or disrespectful. It's the breath you talk before reclaiming your sentence. It's the way you hold your body still, meet the other person's eyes, and then calmly continue when you're ready. That's presence. That's power without aggression. In practical terms, this looks like letting the other person finish their interruption without reacting, then pausing and continuing as though the interruption hadn't derailed you, not with passive-aggressive tone, not with resentment, but with unwavering steadiness. That kind of response subtly reminds the room, you're here to contribute, not compete. It's also worth noting that silence used intentionally gives you time to assess. Not all interruptions are the same. Some are accidental, some come from nervous energy, some are rooted in control. When you don't rush to respond, you give yourself space to understand what kind of moment you're in, and to respond accordingly instead of reactively. That awareness is what separates reactive communication from intentional communication. In the few seconds of silence, you can ask yourself, is this interruption malicious or unintentional? Does this need to be addressed directly, or will silence and redirection be enough? You become a strategist, not just a participant. In group settings especially, silence can be an amplifier. When someone talks over you in a meeting or discussion and you pause without losing composure, you often gain allies without even realizing it. Others notice the interruption, they feel the discomfort, and your restraint becomes a quiet statement. I will speak when I am respected. I will contribute when the space is right. You're modeling a new standard for interaction. This also helps prevent escalation. If you interrupt back, tension rises. The conversation becomes a verbal tug of war. But when you pause and choose your next move intentionally, you de-escalate the dynamic, and often you win back not only your speaking time, but also the room's attention. There's a discipline to this. It's not always easy. When you're interrupted, especially repeatedly, or in situations where your voice already feels diminished, it can feel personal. But the discipline of silence teaches you that your presence is not dependent on noise. It's built on certainty, and certainty doesn't yell, it doesn't scramble, it simply waits and then speaks. Even beyond conversation, silence communicates leadership. Leaders don't need to dominate every exchange. They know when to speak and when to pause. They know that the quietest moments often leave the strongest impressions. And they understand that control isn't taken, it's projected by the energy you bring to every word and every pause. Silence also invites reflection, from the interrupter and from others listening. It signals that something went wrong in the flow of conversation, and it gives space for that awareness to rise without confrontation. In that way, silence can be a tool of teaching. You're not calling someone out. You're letting them experience the imbalance of the moment themselves. And when you do speak again, it's not about reclaiming power. It's about continuing your contribution. You don't need to reference the interruption. You don't need to point fingers. The act of continuing is your statement. It says, I'm still here, my words are still valid, and I will not be moved by disrespect. That's strength, not silence. Mastering this skill changes the way people respond to you. Over time, they interrupt less. They listen more closely. They respect the weight of your words because they've seen how intentionally you use them, and they recognize, even unconsciously, that you are not someone who needs to scramble for space. You create it every time you choose presence over reaction, silence over chaos, clarity over noise. When someone talks over you, it may feel like they've taken something from you, your space, your time, your voice. The natural reaction is often to push back, to raise your tone, or to demand that they listen. But the truth is, real respect is not something you demand from others through force or frustration. It's something you model in how you carry yourself, especially when you're under pressure. The way you respond when your voice is interrupted reveals a great deal about how deeply rooted your self-respect is. If you respond with composure, clarity, and firmness, you're not just standing up for yourself. You're showing others what mature, confident communication looks like. You're sending a message without turning the moment into a power struggle. You're choosing to respond with dignity, not aggression. That modeling matters. In any room, whether it's a workplace, a family gathering, or a social setting, people are constantly picking up cues about how to behave from one another. The way you hold your ground calmly can influence others far more than any loud correction or emotional outburst ever could. Respect modeled consistently will eventually shift how people engage with you. When you're being interrupted or talked over, the temptation is to match the energy of the person doing it. If they're loud, you want to get louder. If they're cutting in, you may feel justified in cutting them off right back. But now, both people are trying to prove they deserve to be heard, and the conversation becomes a contest instead of a connection. In that moment, no one is truly listening. Everyone is just waiting for their turn to speak louder. But when you resist that urge and instead hold your space with intentionality, you change the game. You refuse to participate in the tug of war. And by refusing, you often win. Not by overpowering, but by out-centering, by grounding yourself so deeply in your own self-awareness that you no longer feel the need to fight for a place. You simply claim it with your presence. That kind of presence is memorable. People might not remember every word you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. They'll remember that you stayed steady when the conversation got tense. They'll remember that you didn't flinch or lash out, and that memory shapes how they'll treat you next time. You begin to command respect not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. It's important to understand that this kind of modeling isn't about perfection. You don't have to have the perfect comeback or say everything flawlessly. What matters is the energy behind your words. Are you reacting from insecurity, or are you responding from grounded self-worth? That difference changes everything. In fact, even a simple phrase like, "let me finish," when spoken with calm conviction, carries weight. Not because of the words themselves, but because of how they're delivered. With steady eyes, even tone, and unwavering energy. You're not begging for respect, you're affirming your right to it. There's a subtle kind of authority that comes from being emotionally stable in moments when others are not. And when you show that authority, others begin to align themselves with your energy. Conversations become more respectful. People begin to notice the moments they interrupt and start self-correcting. It might not happen instantly, but over time, your consistency shapes the culture of communication around you. In leadership, in relationships, and in day-to-day life, the people who truly influence others are not the ones who shout the loudest. They're the ones who lead by example. They don't just talk about respect. They practice it. They show it to others. And just as importantly, they show it to themselves by holding boundaries with grace. One of the most respectful things you can do for yourself is to not shrink in the face of being dismissed. not by lashing out, but by standing firm. You don't need to compete for validation. You validate yourself by continuing to speak with confidence, even if someone tries to cut you off. You teach others how to treat you by how you treat yourself in those moments and how you carry yourself through them. When you model respect in difficult moments, you also make space for others to reflect. Sometimes people don't even realize the impact of their behavior until they see a different standard in front of them. Your calm, consistent response becomes a mirror. It gently reflects back to them what's not working, without shame, without conflict, just truth. This approach also builds trust. People begin to recognize that you're not easily shaken, that you don't resort to power plays or emotional spikes to make a point, that you're dependable even under pressure. That kind of reliability is rare and deeply respected, whether people say it or not. And this doesn't mean you won't feel frustrated or disrespected in the moment. Of course you will. You're human, but emotional discipline is about not letting that internal reaction take over your external response. It's about feeling the sting of being interrupted and still choosing to respond with integrity instead of impulse. Over time, this builds an inner reputation with yourself. You start to trust your own ability to handle tough moments. You stop fearing confrontation because you know you don't have to match someone's behavior to maintain your voice. You learn that respect isn't something you earn once. It's something you build every day, one response at a time. People who talk over others often do so out of habit, ego, or insecurity. They expect others to either back down or escalate, but when they're met with composure, it throws off the rhythm they're used to. They're left to face the weight of their interruption, often for the first time. And that moment of discomfort can spark growth, not just for you, but for them too. That's the quiet impact of modeling respect. You don't just change one conversation. You influence the entire culture of communication around you. You show what's possible when someone refuses to lose their voice, but also refuses to raise it unnecessarily. When someone knows their value and expresses it not with noise, but with clarity, there's a quiet power in that kind of presence. It's not loud, but it echoes. It doesn't demand attention, but it commands it. And in a world full of people trying to outspeak one another, your choice to model respect calmly, consistently, and courageously will always stand out.